I'm going to try and answer in about 20 minutes this question, what is social policy? And I should say it's not an easy question to answer. I've been trying to answer it since 1967. One of the reasons why it's not an easy question to answer is that it's changed. Social policy has been taught in Britain at universities since I suppose the late 1930s. And in its earliest form, it was part of the social work training that was set up in the 1930s by the Charity Organisation Society, the COS, at the London School of Economics. And the students who came on the courses there came to do professional training, and they learnt about social legislation, and it was really designed to provide a kind of policy framework for their practice as social workers. Then in the post-war period, it had a period of being reformist and closely associated with the Labour Party. Tawney, Titmuss, Townsend and Abel Smith, all based at the London School of Economics, were associated with the Labour Party. And these men were responsible for the rediscovery of poverty, and they were committed and critical and left-wing. And then in the 1980s, the subject shifted with the new right critique derived from neoliberal economic thinking, with less commitment to the public provision of welfare, more interest in the plural nature of the meeting of social need, the mixed economy of welfare, and the subject became more technical. Its interactions with other fields became more important, and the process of delivering social welfare became more associated with markets rather than just the provision of the state. And now I think the subject has shifted again to a greater preoccupation with the outcomes, not so much with what services do or how much is spent, but what they achieve in terms of outcomes. And I'm going to say a little bit about the notion of well-being and how that's becoming increasingly the focus of social policy. So we become more interested in outcomes than inputs. And also the subject has become much more interested in comparing itself with other countries' provision. So what do I say when I'm asked at a party by someone who has no association with the subject, what is social policy? Well, I start by saying it's the academic study of the institutions of the welfare state. And they look a bit blank. And then I go on to say that it combines the disciplines of economics, politics, and sociology, and it applies those to social problems. And they look a bit blank still. And then I start talking about what I do. And I say that I've just completed a study of the 27 OECD countries, and we found that the children in the United Kingdom are the most miserable in any of the rich countries in the OECD. This was a study published by UNICEF in 2007. And they suddenly become interested and indeed alarmed. There are some definitions of the subject in textbooks. Here are some: study of the diswelfares of modern society, the study of ways in which it's possible to organize a more equitable distribution of resources, the study of the limits of collective provision to meet common needs, the study of human needs and how they can be met. Social policy is a field of study focused on a set of institutions and a range of activities concerned with distribution and exchange. Social policy is the study of the scope for social as distinct from individual acts, about the limits of individualism and the limits of collectivism. And then there's David Donaldson's definition. He was one of this group of mainly left-wing academics at the London School of Economics, and he wrote a textbook on social policy. And he said that we are concerned with an ill-defined but recognizable territory, the development of collective action for the advancement of social welfare. Our job is to identify and clarify problems within this territory, to throw light upon this, drawing light from any discipline that appears to be relevant, and contributing when we can to the solution of problems. And I think that's probably my favorite encapsulation of what we're all about. Well, sometimes we define ourselves in relation to our interest in particular institutions of the welfare state. So our students study the National Health Service, they study the personal social services, the social work services, housing policy is central to social policy, the social security system, which takes about a third of all public expenditure and keeps some substantial minorities of the population alive through the provision of income, is part of our subject matter. We are students of the education system, the employment system. Crime and penal policy is a stream within our degree here. The problem about pointing to institutions is where you draw the line. What institutions are we not interested in? A few years ago, if we'd, sort of 20 years ago, if you'd asked us whether we were interested in the electricity supply industry or the water supply industry, we would have all said, of course not. That's nothing to do with social policy. But actually, we are now studying these industries because of the problems of rising fuel prices and rising water prices and the impacts that's having on the population. And the concept of fuel poverty and water poverty are now part of the discourse of social policy. So the boundaries are very difficult to set. And we are also defined by our intellectual preoccupations, the concepts or ideas that we argue about when we're studying social policy. And I'm not going to go through this great long list, but these are some of the ideas that are central to the kind of things we talk about in seminars. So social need, poverty, impairment, disability, handicapped, health, sickness, rights, equality, equity, care, community. These are all concepts that are bread and butter to the student of social policy. And we spend time talking about what they are, how to achieve them, how to measure them, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the measures we use, the ways we use to describe them. So coming back to the boundary problem again, this is just an example of some of the difficulties we have as members of staff in deciding what the boundaries of our subject is. But a few years ago, a student came to us and said, I want to write my dissertation. Every student doing the undergraduate degree writes a dissertation in their third year. I want to write my dissertation on the Dangerous Dogs Act. And we said, dangerous dogs? What's that got to do with social policy? It was a piece of legislation that had recently been passed as a result of dogs eating children. Anyway, we mulled over this proposition, and we decided, yes, this student could write about the Dangerous Dogs Act because it was a piece of legislation trying to stop children being harmed, and we thought that that was therefore of importance to social welfare, to improving well-being, and therefore relevant in social policy. And actually she wrote a jolly good dissertation. The Dangerous Dogs Act is a particularly poor piece of legislation. We normally define what we do by looking at the journals that we publish. We publish a set of journals like all academic subjects. Our lead journal is the Journal of Social Policy, but there are a number of other journals, some specialists, some more general, that cover the discipline. But actually, some of the most interesting developments taking place in our subject are at the boundaries, at this edge, which I've already spoken at. And one of our senior lecturers, Meg Hubie, has recently kind of expanded the scope of the subject by writing a book on social policy and the environment. And environmental policy is now very relevant to lots of parts of social policy, mainly because of the distributional consequences of environmental change, global warming, and its impact on people's living standards and well-being. So a bit about what social policy is not. It's not just a description of services, public provision. We used to teach social administration. The subject changed its name in the late 1960s, early 1970s, from social administration to social policy. though understanding how institutions work is an important discipline of the subject. We need to know how the social security system works or how the housing market works in order to understand what's going on. Social policy isn't social work. Social work is a separate subject of study, though in this department here at York we're bedfellows. It's the Department of Social Policy and Social Work, and in many other universities it is as well. And most social workers study social policy, and quite a lot of students of social policy go on to do social work as part of their postgraduate study and join the social work profession. But it's not the same. And social policy isn't economics, politics, or sociology. Our journals are different, our discourses, how we talk about the subject is different, our skills and knowledge are different, and our concepts, the ideas that we're preoccupied with, are distinct. However, when you study social policy, you will study economics, politics, and sociology as part of the first year activity. How many of you are doing economics at the present time, or will be doing economics A-levels? Right. Well, that'll be very useful to you if you want to study social policy, because social policy, of course, has an important influence on economic performance, and it's used as a tool of macro and microeconomic management. And there is a big argument going on at the moment, as you know, about the austerity package that the present government is pursuing in order to ride the deficit in the public finances, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and these are economic arguments as well. Economics is particularly relevant to the supply of labour and demand, employment, and we're also interested in unemployment and employment because it's the main source of income and well-being in our society. Human capital, economists talk about the value of investing in human capital. We are also interested in investment in human capital because we are interested in the health service, the educational system, and so on. And quite a lot of the tools that economists use to evaluate economic things, we also use to evaluate social policies. So we're interested in effectiveness, efficiency, cost effectiveness, cost benefit, and the relationship between the economics and social policies is very close. Today, in York, they are launching the latest living wage levels. And we're doing a study jointly with our economics department at the moment here on the impact of the living wage on people's living standards. How many people are doing politics? Well, you'll find that there's a lot of overlap between politics and social policy. So you're interested in decision making, so are we. You're interested in the policy making process, so are we. You're interested in the different roles of political actors, parliament, pressure groups, the media, so are we. And we are also interested in the levels of governance. But also we share many of the political theory preoccupations. The concept of justice or equity or rights are common discourses in politics and indeed social policy. And then the sociology. How many people are doing sociology? Well, sociology probably has its closest links to social policy. We share analytical concepts like class, status, role, gender, race. We are interested in families, groups, institutions, professions, and cities, just as sociologists are in different ways. We have a shared interest in pathologies, in deviancy, suicide, crime, and so on. And it is the case that once sociology was closer to social policy than it is now. Social policy is an applied subject, and sociology has over the years become a less applied subject than it was when it was first founded. And so there's tended to be a separation between sociology and social policy, but there are still close links. And those three, economics, politics, and sociology, aren't the only subjects which are relevant to social policy. We also cover some history. There's a course on psychology, social geography, the spatial distribution of things, demography, population change, philosophy. Many of the ideas that we deal with are also part of philosophical discourse. Law, of course, is important to social policy because most of it's based on legislation. Our relationship, we have close associations with medicine and public health and epidemiology, ecology, management, and statistics as other subjects, which are all part of our courses. I think there are two particular characteristics you need to be aware of about social policy. The first is our empirical traditions. The subject was founded through the Blue Book investigations of the Poor Law Commissioners, the surveys of poverty by Booth and Seaborn Rowntree here in York. He did his first survey in York in 1899, and he was the first person to define poverty and to study it empirically. The Webbs, the London School of Economics, School of Empirical Activity, and now here at York we have a York School of Empirical Research based in the Centre for Housing Policy, which is the leading centre for housing research in the country, and the Social Policy Research Unit, which I'm a member of, which does research on a range of different subjects, but centrally care services, social security policy, and child protection. The other thing about social policy is that it can't escape from ideological concerns. Richard Titmuss wrote a textbook called The Commitment to Welfare. Most of those people who are engaged in the discourse of social policy are inevitably committed to the value of the public provision of social policy. Not all of us, but quite a lot of us are. And it's been suggested that social policy therefore has a left-wing bias. We are concerned, most of us, with people at the bottom of the heap, with social policy, with social problems and solutions to those problems, and to, more recently, to discourses about social exclusion. And so there are different interpretations of the welfare state that are brought forward in the subject of the origins of the welfare state, which are competing ideological interpretations. Anti-collectivist versus free market versus liberal versus integrationist versus Marxist. These are all competing ideas about the nature of social policy. Well, just let me say a bit about what I do each day, and I've just got a list here of the things I'm working at the moment. I'm engaged, like many of us are, with arguments about the present government's austerity policies and whether this is the right solution to our economic situation, or whether we should be rather investing in a more Keynesian way and increasing demand. So I write articles and concerned with those issues. I've just written a report for the European Union on how Britain is doing in making its contribution to the European Union 2020 social inclusion targets, which is to reduce poverty by 20 million by 2020. And I'm responsible for reporting to the European Union on that every year. I have to write 3 reports. I'm presently responding to the government's invitation to comment on their consultation on the definitions of poverty. They're not happy that we define poverty relatively, and they want to think of new ways of measuring poverty, and we're all being asked to make suggestions. I've just recently written a blog on the suggestion that we should cut back on child benefits, cash benefits for mothers, and use that money instead to provide direct services of child care. I'm against doing that. I've written an article which is coming out in the next Journal of Social Policy about the idea of a selfish generation. This is the idea that those people who were born in the 60s boomers, have been taking more than their fair share of national resources and leaving the generations that come after them without their fair share of resources. I'm not a supporter of those ideas. And when I leave you today, I'm going up to my office to write a case for the introduction of a child care grant in Namibia, one of the poorest countries in Africa, actually very rich in resources, but one of the most unequal countries in Africa, and with very poor outcomes for children. And UNICEF have asked me to write a set of arguments that they can use for introducing child cash grants there. So that's the kind of thing that a social policy person does. So, conclusions from what I've said. Social policy is multidisciplinary. It involves economic, sociology and politics and applies them to social problems. It's empirical. It involves research. It's evaluative. And it's prescriptive. And it's not just about public provision, it's about the mixed economy of welfare, private, public, personal, any combination of activities that are to do with well-being. It's concerned with distribution and redistribution. It's increasingly interested in the processes of policy making. It's analytical and theoretical, and it's increasingly comparative. We're increasingly concerned with international studies. And I'll leave you with a conundrum, which I would I'd be very interested if you would apply your mind to, not necessarily here now, but on the way home. And I think you've got my handout, which has got my email address on it, and do send me your suggestions. I said earlier that the UNICEF report had found that British children were at the bottom of the league table of well-being and that was based on data up to, I suppose, 2003 was the most up-to-date data. But this chart shows that this is based on large samples of 11 to 15-year-olds asked questions in the British Household Panel Survey between 1994 and 2010. And it shows that well-being, this is subjective well-being, this is life satisfaction and happiness, has improved significantly over that period. And particularly for girls. Girls were more miserable than boys in 1994, but during this period they've become, there's no significant difference between girls and boys. Now, I don't know why that has happened. You've lived through some of that, and I'd like to know what you think might be the reasons why the well-being of children in 2010 is significantly higher than it was in 1994, though it's interesting that it's been coming down since the recession started in 2008. There's been some falling off in the trend, but nevertheless, it is the case that children have got happier. Why? I'll stop there.